Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see a new face this morning, and it's really lovely to be here with all of you, but especially you, Joel, having showed up the whole weekend, so I know that's not easy. When Reverend Shuke, and thank you for asking me to do the Dharma talk this morning, requested last night that I do it, she was a little, I think, foiled because she thought she was going to surprise me, but Daiho Roshi gave me a heads up when I arrived. She said, well, I didn't want you to have a chance to prepare. And I said, don't worry, I don't prepare anymore. And really, that's true. I like to call what we've already done here this morning the tofu and potatoes of Zen practice. After all, we're in a retreat, so we have to have tofu. What is there really to say? The longer I think we practice, the less and less and less there is to say about practice. And in fact, seeing as we're sitting here at Rohatsu Sesshin, in the lineage of Matsuoka Roshi, I'm reminded of a teaching of his in the second volume of his teaching, Mokurai, where he's speaking about enlightenment, the theme of this Rohatsu Sesshin. And he simply says that in the Soto tradition, just sitting Zen, Zazen practice, is enlightenment itself. I think the phraseology is 5 minutes of Zazen or 5 minutes of Shikantaza is 5 minutes of Buddha. So what really is there to say about that? So I'm drawn into this, what I call liturgy of life, or not liturgy, but rather lectionary of life, what it is that we're doing right now in this very moment, to try to pull something and extrapolate a topic to talk about. So Rohatsu. Rohatsu is really interesting. It's otherwise known as Bodhi Day in the world Buddhist tradition, but in Japanese it literally means the 8th day of the 12th month. And this is, of course, the sesshin, or the retreat that commemorates Shakyamuni Buddha's awakening. And it's traditionally, if we have the time, and some of us are monks and have the time, but most of us have to work and have other things to do in the world, we sit for 7 days, mirroring the time that Shakyamuni set in some traditions under the Bodhi tree. I've literally been around the world and heard 7 days, 7 months, 7 years. Everybody has a little bit of a different idea of the allegory and mythology around the Buddha's awakening. And especially today, in our, let's say, secularizing society, desacralized society, we see some shifting ideas about what that's all about anyway. There seems to be a big push, especially with the works, there was a recent book Stephen Batchelor put out again, of Stephen Batchelor's and others like him, to go back to the Pali Canon to try to resurrect original Buddhism because we've somehow seemingly deviated. And so I'm reminded of the idea of Buddha's awakening in the Pali Canon, where it's said to have had 3 aspects. First was the knowledge of all of his past lives. Second was the knowledge of the details, the intimate workings of karma and reincarnation. And third was insight into the Four Noble Truths. I don't know how secular that understanding really is. And I don't know that we really need to go very far back to try to resurrect some idea of this thing called awakening, the theme of this retreat. In fact, I think it's probably helpful, or rather not helpful, to do so. We've had 2,600 years of evolution of this tradition. We've arrived at the school of Zen, which is this fusion of the mother, the womb of Taoism, and the father of the Buddhist philosophy that was imported into China. And we've got this really unique thing. So back to Matsuoka Roshi's teaching, 5 minutes of Zazen, 5 minutes of Shikantaza is 5 minutes of Buddha. What is there to say about that? In his Dharma talk, I think it was yesterday, if I remember correctly, Roshi spoke about this process of paying attention, attentiveness. We spoke about it over lunch yesterday too, of having some profound significance. And we questioned after lunch yesterday what that really means. I think we see, if we were going to define the elements of this thing we call awakening in our time and place, we have to talk about what he was talking about, these intimate details of the workings of life, the interconnection, the interconnectedness, the pratitya samupad as it's known in the early sutras. Just sitting down, just paying attention, leaving things alone, letting the body and mind fall away, seeing the intimate details that make up this illusory thing that we call the self, seeing the world around us, whether that be in the form of sitting zazen or kinhin. Reverend Shuke talked about the intimate details of how all these motions and sensations come together to form our walking meditation. Be it picking up the flavors that have been otherwise unnoticed in white rice, as a participant pointed out yesterday when we're doing our our silent, seated or yogi style lunch or eating meditation. Whether it be just examining the aspects of anything that comes up in our daily life, sitting outside, driving around, paying profound attention. You know, it's interesting. I trained a little bit in the Tibetan Vajrayana tradition, and there's this concept of emptiness that we just talked about in the Harsh Sutra, or rather chanted about. And in the Tibetan tradition, there's actually a vow that monks take that says, I vow to never teach the doctrine of emptiness or shunyata to anybody not ready to receive it. I always thought that was interesting. You know, we often get around that in Zen by just saying, just sit there. In fact, I've often heard that was Matsuoka Roshi's advice for any problem you had in your life. Sit zazen, sit zazen, sit zazen. But seeing as we talked about yesterday, open mouth is already a mistake, and we have to talk about something, it's interesting to examine that in the light of modernity. You know, I think it was really an important teaching to not introduce these concepts to anybody not ready to receive them 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago in a pre-Newtonian society, pre-scientific society, wherein talking about interdependence, interconnection, the illusion being broken apart that we examine in our daily lives and all of our experience could really shake up someone's worldview. It might put them into a place that wasn't so good. But today we have science. We have electromagnetic telescopes where we can examine subatomic particles of matter. We can hypothesize about even smaller particles than quarks. It's really interesting to look at our lives as being something other than this big picture that we're always stuck up in and preoccupied with. Seeing these little workings that somehow make us step back and just wonder. I think wonder is a good word when we're talking about enlightenment. You know, just bear with me right now. Let's do a little bit of an exercise. We've done a lot of meditation this weekend already, but I want everybody just to maybe assume that posture with a straight back for a moment. And just set your gaze in front of you. And find a spot on the floor, like you would do in any other period of Zazen. But just focus on that one spot. And I want you to do all that you can to take in all of the qualities of that spot, of that area. Its color, its texture, any particles of dust that float in your line of vision as you're taking in all that there is to take in about that area of focus. Anything that changes, anything that doesn't change. What is that one area of focus in all of its quality? Breathing in and out, finding the fullness of it. And 2, I'd like you to open your ears with your eyes and listen very carefully to any sounds or sensations entering your ear. Be it the sound of the fan, the sound of my voice, the sound of the sniffling that's been going on throughout the weekend, whatever the case may be, take in the fullness of the quality that is your hearing, the sound around you, whilst not neglecting that spot that we've chosen a moment ago. The fullness of our sight, the fullness of our capacity for hearing. And as you upkeep that, how about the sensation on your skin? Be it the weight of your body on your cushion, any numbness or soreness in your legs, any coolness or warmth touching your skin. What do you feel? In the fullness of the capacity of that sensation, what do you feel? Whilst not neglecting what you're seeing in that particular spot of focus. What you're hearing, what you're feeling. Okay, so everybody gets the idea. Okay, how many of us were able to completely take in the fullness of each of those 3 senses? Yeah, me neither. That's an interesting idea. We haven't even touched on the 5, let alone the other. You know, that's a myth, by the way. We don't only have 5 senses. There's a lot more senses than that, but we'll just use that for the sake of this teaching or argument, whatever the case may be. We move around through our lives in this thing we call dukkha, or suffering, that insight into the noble truth number 1. We have a lot of problems in our life. And we objectify our lives in these big pictures without ever paying too much attention to the details. We do that with the good and the bad, by the way. And there's some audacity to that, I think. When we really start to complain about our lives and our experience without really having the capacity to take in the fullness of a single moment with what we see, with what we hear, with what we smell, with what we taste. With those base 5 senses, let alone our capacity to have an opinion about it. This opportunity to insert a pause and pay full attention to the best of our ability in the process of meditation is really a wonderful and interesting thing. Illuminating this moment just as it is. Beyond just the big picture, but to the smaller pictures that are making up this projection of our life. I find when we give ourselves enough of a pause, enough of an opportunity, enough of an experience, as several of you have opted to do in coming here and meditating today and throughout the weekend and the other Zazen-kai Sesshin that are held here throughout the year, something interesting starts to happen. We maybe don't objectify everything quite so much, and we step into the fullness of that experience, and we're left often with not too much more than, oh, how much we don't really understand. I think in the 50s, perhaps, before we really started having this modern view of the world around us, it might have been a good question to ask, as many of the mystics of the time did, what existed before God? Still a good question for many people on a theological path today. For science, what was there before the Big Bang? For just everybody, what is there before we objectify our reality? At that point, our thinking naturally falls away. The mind falls away when we cease to objectify, but rather look at it and behold it just as it is. So too does this idea of self that can uphold any notion of suffering or its antithesis, annihilation. Mind and body both fall away the more we pay attention, the more we behold this moment by moment by moment passing experience. And I think what we're left with is this sense of wonder, this sense of awe, this sense of stunnedness, I think. And in that place where mind and body fall away, where our notions of self fall away, no self, no problem. And this is a really wonderful, wonderful gift that we can give ourselves, that we can give the world. Stepping back, beholding, stepping into this sense of what I call in Zen as perpetual okayness. This practice doesn't guarantee happiness. It doesn't promise happiness. It often doesn't even give happiness. I think sometimes when we start to really examine the details of our lives and we get just below the surface and we start to see the karma or the interconnection that's creating these things, it's a little messy. It's a little not so fun to look at. Zazen magnifies our experience. The bad becomes bad, and the good becomes really good. It magnifies everything. But this practice isn't about happiness. It's not about sunshine and rainbows religion, as I often call it. But it's about stepping into this place that's beyond happiness, that's beyond sadness or depression, it's beyond elation, and it's beyond despair. I think so often looking at the world in that dichotomy is like trying to sum up all the flavors you can construct in your kitchen with just salt and pepper. Yeah, salt and pepper are great. Too much of either one, not so good. But there's so much more than just that. Stepping beyond these notions of what we crave and desire and try to attach to and what we try to push away and detach from. What I want, what I don't want. What I like, what I don't like. Happiness, unhappiness. That's not what this practice is about. I said yesterday over lunch that several of us hold precepts, and precepts are an interesting thing if we look at them in their original terminology. They're called prati moksha. Prati means behavior, something leading toward, and moksha means liberation. Liberation. I think in Western Buddhism we're kind of becoming adolescents as a whole. Buddhism is not very old here. And in fact, many of the original translations of sutras and Buddhist thought, I think the best thing we can refer to them as is misnomers. This word enlightenment, which some Zen teachers call the dreaded E word, is one of them, really. It's not something that actually exists in Buddhist language. Venerable Daiho Roshi and I were talking the other day about these interesting words that we refer to as enlightenment that have somehow shifted, like the word bodhi, to mean awakening, the actual act of awakening, seeing things just as they are, not being in this dreamlike state of reality experience. So liberation is a constant theme that's rather interesting. Liberation doesn't have a whole lot to do with happiness or unhappiness. It has to do with transcendence. It has to do with, as the Heart Sutra says, gone, gone, gone beyond. Gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate. Going even beyond that, completely gone beyond, always becoming bodhi, awake. Even though we're sitting here in Rohatsu Sesshin, the examination of the Buddha's own awakening and trying to strive for that without really having a solid, concrete idea of what it is, this idea of transcendence, I think, is an important one to keep. Because we're sitting here in this, really wonderful zendo. I've come here several years now and visited with Reverend Shuke and Venerable Daiho, and we've seen the zendo that was over in a kind of a storefront area that was really beautiful and immaculately set up, and we've seen it be this room back here and turn into this wonderful beyond wall zendo that Reverend Shuke has formed. And I think it's really paying homage to Matsuoka Roshi, who so often taught against cathedral zen. This practice isn't easy. I think this is something really authentic about this stuff, popping up in homes, popping up in community centers, wherever we can do it. You don't go there for the overwhelmingness and beauty of a temple that's seemingly transcendent for a while. You don't go there because it's a fun thing to do necessarily. You don't go there because there's going to be a ton of friends to socialize with. You come to these places for one purpose, to sit down, to shut up, and to pay attention. Right? And it's not something that's easy to do. Transcendence isn't easy. Looking at yourself isn't easy, but it's a wonderful opportunity that we can provide ourselves with and provide the rest of the world with, this opportunity for a pause, even if it's only ourselves taking a moment with our reactivity, with our habitual, trying to create an experience or reacting to the experiences and actions of others. So I don't know what else there is to say this morning. I said I didn't prepare for this, and that's true. I just wanted to sit down because I was requested to do so, and maybe provide a few invitations to look beyond this notions of getting anything, and look beyond our notions of who and what we are and might be, and gaze directly into the essence of reality, the essence of shikantaza, just sitting silently illumining the world, our experience moment after moment after moment. Letting 5 minutes of zazen, whether it's preoccupied with am I doing it right or not, be just that. 5 minutes of Buddhahood. 5 minutes of perfect awakening, or 20 or 30 or whatever is the case may be. There's something interesting, and I want to just point out again as we return to this notion of what original awakening might have referred to in the Pali Canon with the Four Noble Truths. I think the first three are pretty obvious. We have dukkha. Sometimes suffering happens in our lives. Things happen that we're not so fond of. Then we have the second noble truth that says why and where does that come from? Well, because we attach and crave and desire for things that are changing, that are impermanent, and otherwise might not be present in this very moment. Number 3, we have nirodha, the possibility of cessation, the possibility of transcendence. And number 4, we have the Noble Eightfold Path. I'm not a super intelligent guy. I've always had problems with these lists that show up in early Buddhism. So I try to find the commonality. Even though I've been practicing Buddhism for most of my life, I can't put the Noble Eightfold Path together in order. I'll be completely honest. But what sticks out to me is the very first thing that prefaces each of the Eightfold Path, this word right, this word correct, this word noble, this word true, however it's often presented in English. How do we define right, correct, and true? How do we define right, correct, and true? If this first noble truth is the problem, the second noble truth is its origin, the third noble truth is the solution, and the fourth noble truth is its origin, that's important to examine. Well, what is correct action? What is correct effort? What is correct mindfulness? What is correct view, the very first one? I think we have to define that word correct. To me, I don't think we can define it much out of the realm of our actual experience. What's happening in this very moment? By what other gauge can we define correct? By what other gauge that's not some form of changing and shifting morality as it often is as time goes by? It's what's happening right now in this moment. And why is that? It's because there's no other option. There's no other option. And by that same standard, you could say that everything that's happening, everything you're doing, is incorrect, is untrue. But what do we want to edify in our lives? I find that if we're usually coming here for some sort of cultivation, we want to edify something that at the very least we're not going to push away. We tend not to push away this sort of positive view, if you would let me use that word, of correct, of true. The reality that just is this very moment. And I think it's important when we look at it on the cushion. What is correct meditation? What is correct view in meditation? And I think the point is that you really can't do it wrong so long as you're doing it. We often hear things like, oh, well, when I'm sitting in meditation on the cushion, I'm thinking and checking. Well, that's fine. Are you completely present and you're thinking and you're checking and letting your mind wander? That's correct view. That's what's happening in this moment. It's correct meditation. The form of zazen takes care of itself, the actual posture, the sitting down and illuminating whatever the mind is giving rise to. Now, there's instructions, of course, that would teach us ways to perhaps see through that and get around it, but ultimately, the practice, as long as you apply yourself to it, takes care of itself. Enlightenment is not something you need to concern yourself with. It takes care of itself. Enlightenment, illumination, is giving your full attentiveness to whatever you're doing in that moment. We know in this non-dual tradition that nirvana and samsara are not actually different. They're not actually separate. Delusion and awakening are not actually different. They're not actually separate. In fact, in this correct view of the world around us, this complete acceptance of what's happening in the moment, you've never done anything that wasn't completely and perfectly awakened. That's an interesting view of this practice, I think. Sanctifying all of our lives, all of our experience with our attentiveness. There's nowhere else to escape to. There's no other option to run to. What is what is, whether we like it or not. And it's okay. It's correct. And it's true. 5 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes of Buddha. The posture itself in the Soto tradition, of course, being of particular importance. The integrity of the form. So, thank you very much for your practice. Does anybody